Hello, everyone. Welcome to Americans for Limited Government live stream. I'm Catherine Mortensen, joined by Richard Manning, the president of Americans for Limited Government. Today, what we want to talk about is really the huge news of this day. It's Biden's opioid crisis. This is a crisis of his own making. President Biden's lax border security policies have led to a dramatic increase in the amount of fentanyl coming across our border. And Rick, anything else you want to say to set up this story, and then we'll go to a short video?
Yes. First of all, Catherine, this is really important because it touches a lot of people's personal lives. This isn't something far off. This is really in your neighborhood. It's in every neighborhood, and it's something that we have to really, just be aware of. And most people are asking the question, why? Why is this? Why is opioid addiction? Why are more people dying of opioids now than before? And the fact of the matter is, just last week it was announced that in the past 12 months, more than 100,000 people had died of opioid overdose, and that's a dramatic increase over previous 12-month periods. And so we need to figure out what's going on, and that's what we're going to be discussing.
So I'm going to show a short clip from a video that was done 2 months ago by PBS. A crew went undercover into a fentanyl making plant down in Sinaloa, Mexico. I think you're really going to like this video, so just stand by and we'll watch that.
We are calling Pedro is one of the first links in a chain that sends fentanyl from Mexico to the United States.
This package of fentanyl, which is sold as a competitor to heroin, weighs 11 pounds and sells for $15,000 in Sinaloa's capital, Culiacán.
The further the product travels, the more valuable it gets. By the time it arrives in America, 11 pounds could sell for $100,000. Fentanyl has proven to be a diabolical game changer for the cartels. It's inexpensive, it can be mixed into drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, and other opiates.
Right now, as fentanyl is stronger than anything, a little fentanyl could make 11 pounds of black goat, and it is stronger than the poppy flower. That's why people gave up on heroin. It's way cheaper with fentanyl.
So many people in America are dying of fentanyl overdose. So do you feel somehow responsible since what they're consuming is made here?
Well, it is something that one who consumes decides on his own. Drugs are bad and addictive. Consumers are aware that the effect doesn't last long, but they cannot go without it. Although they know that it is wrong, it is addictive.
Have you had any of your friends die making it?
So many died for a few pesos. We all like money. There are people who aspire to have better things, but the big money is not made by us. It's made by others. Many workers have no other job. It's a hustle.
This man who we're...
Go ahead, Rick, your reaction to that?
Wow. First of all, it's a pretty powerful video. PBS, I don't often say good things about them, but in this instance, they did a really outstanding job in doing that. And it really explains the economics of fentanyl. We focus on heroin as being, largely generated out of poppy fields in Afghanistan. But the reality is that fentanyl is a far more powerful, addictive, and deadly drug than anything that poppies make. And it's so deadly that just to touch, when cops come across drugs and they're not sure what they are, they don't touch them now because fentanyl will literally seep through your skin and kill you if you touch a pile of it. So it's so dangerous that just touching it can kill you, and yet it's being laced into all sorts of different drugs to provide a massive high and the addiction that goes with it, and it's truly making it into a deadly addiction.
And Rick, I think it's important to explain to our viewers and supporters why Americans for Limited Government, a group dedicated to limiting the size of government, why are we focused on this opioid crisis and what's happening at the border? And that's because one of the few legitimate roles our government has and what taxpayers expect out of what we pay to Washington each year is we expect that our borders will be protected. And that's why Americans for Limited Government is looking at this issue so closely, because the Biden administration has totally abandoned their duties at the border. And that's one of the few legitimate jobs that government has.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of things happen over the last 2 years. In about midway through the Trump administration, they put a heavy emphasis on stopping China from exporting fentanyl, because most of the fentanyl that was coming in was from China. And the Trump administration really went after the Chinese government on that point, and got some agreements. Whether they followed them or not is another story, but got some agreements to try for them to crack down on their fentanyl manufacturers, who are legal, by the way, in China. They just are not allowed to distribute them. They're not allowed to distribute them in China. And so what the Chinese were doing is they were effectively dumping very, very addictive drugs and killer drugs into America. And it was the history was when the Chinese ended up losing a war to Great Britain. It was called the Opium Wars. And Great Britain won essentially by flooding certain cities in China with so much opium that the Chinese people essentially were just opium addicts and wouldn't fight back. And so that's how the Brits won. That's how the Brits got control of Hong Kong originally. And so so historically, they're very, very cognizant of the opium wars. And they're engaging in that against the United States by shipping fentanyl and other drugs here. And they were partnering with the cartels to deliver them into America. Well, the cartels have said, gee, I don't need the Chinese to do this. We can make the fentanyl. And so now the Sinaloa cartel has cut the Chinese out of the business a little bit, and they're making it themselves so they get the maximum profit out of it. Bottom line is, when we have open borders, when we aren't protecting our borders, when we're not building walls, when we're not actually having enough personnel to man the border, to put people along the border, when we're not engaged in interdicting people along the border every step of the way, when we're not going after the tunnels and other things that have been built under the border to safe houses inside of America, when we're not going after Sinaloa properties and other cartel properties that they've purchased along the border to be able to build houses and warehouses so they can have places for those tunnels to pop up into, free and clear of people's notice, we're not doing our job. The government is not protecting the interests of the United States. We're not protecting our border from incursion. And in this case, it's a deadly incursion. We're talking about people who are coming in with deadly drugs. What's more, they're sending their soldiers across the border to take over the streets to sell the drugs. Because ultimately the cartels are a business, and they're creating a vertically aligned business where they control the production, they control the distribution, the supply chain, shall you say, and they're controlling the end retail sale of these drugs. And that way they get maximum dollars out of every pound of drugs they sell. That's how the cartels are setting this up. And it's one of the reasons we have such bloodbaths on our streets in urban areas, because there's a fight over who's going to control those streets. And the cartels want to control the streets of America, and certainly the drug sales in the streets of America. So it's an ugly, ugly business. And it's all because what we've done is by effectively opening our borders under Biden, we have created this crisis. We have allowed the flooding of our cities with the deadliest of most deadly drugs, fentanyl, and the soldiers to sell them and to take control of the streets in our own country.
Rick, reporter Joseph Simonson from the Washington Free Beacon has a story that's up on the screen right now. And what he has found is that the Customs and Border Protection's fentanyl seizures skyrocketed by over 40% in the month of October. This comes as drug traffickers and cartels take advantage of Biden's border crisis. And you were saying earlier that what's happening down there, and the reporter in his piece brings this up, is Biden has directed our resources at the border to be processing these asylum claims that under Trump, they were told to stay in Mexico, his stay in Mexico policy. now we have our Border Patrol people focused on those asylum claims. And as you said, they are neglecting their more important duty in terms of protecting the taxpayers and the American citizens, the more important duty of securing the border from these illegal drugs and these cartels. And so that's why we're seeing this massive increase, because they simply have sort of left that almost unattended. And instead, they're out there processing these asylum claims.
Yeah, it may seem contradictory, the statement in the headline that's on the screen, but let me explain it. I think it fits right together. The cartels are being so brazen and just putting so much of this stuff across the border so rapidly that they know they're going to lose part of it, and so but they don't care, because so much of the border is open. If somebody ends up stumbling into a border patrol agent by accident, it's not destroying their distribution chain. It's a small loss, because they've got so much product coming across the border, because there's so many holes in the border. And so effectively that record seizures reflects the fact that how much is actually getting through. It's not because the border is tight, it's actually the opposite. The DHS is admitting that the cartels are just flooding our country with this stuff. And in doing so, and the Border Patrol, as overtaxed as they are, as much time as they spend being paper pushers and not enforcement officers, the Border Patrol is still coming across record amounts of fentanyl that they're interdicting. And that just tells you the volume of the problem. And just, I can't emphasize this enough. If you know somebody who's struggling with drug addiction, if you're struggling with drug addiction, opioid addiction is extremely hard to get rid of. It is, and it's something that you go to the hospital for back pain, they give you a drug, OxyContin or something to take, and suddenly you end up addicted. Rush Limbaugh ended up addicted to OxyContin, which is an opioid. So understand, there's no shame in being addicted to this stuff, but you have to get yourself off, because what we're finding is that the illegal sources of opioids across the board are killing people, because they're laced with this fentanyl, which is deadly. It is deadly. And I've lost kids who were friends of mine from youth group and other things to this crisis. And let me tell you, we just can't lose any more people to this. We have to shut the border down. And there's an answer to this. And I hate to I don't want to just get bad news. There is an answer. First week of December, the Congress is going to decide to fund the government. And we just need to tell them unequivocally that they have to shut down the border. Congress has to put language in place into DHS that they have to shut down the border. They have to continue rebuild. They have to build the wall where the materials are already there. They have to do the things necessary, and they have to appropriate for more Border Patrol officers and more ICE officers, so we can actually deal with this crisis, because they are going to kill us from within. That is the plan. That's what they're doing. You heard the callousness of the guy who was the cook, the fentanyl cook in the video. They're addicted. That's their problem. That's his, and so that's the way they look at the kids in our streets that are addicted to this stuff. We have to fight to get them off. Congress should appropriate money to try to get people off, but as a family, we have to fight for each one of our kids, each one of our siblings, each one of our spouses, to get them off of this stuff if they are addicted, because they will die from it.
And Rick, there is no question that there is a connection between the amount of fentanyl being brought across the border and the record high overdose death. Between March of 2020 and March of 2021, the CDC recorded a record number of overdoses due to the opioid. And I mean overdose deaths. So
Yeah, and one of the key things that they said in their analysis was that there was a dramatic increase in the deaths in the last few months that they were recording, and so that reflects the Biden open border policy. This is it becomes, and as we see month to month, as we get data from month to month to month, we're going to see that accelerate because the deaths are happening much more now than they were a year ago. Think of it this way, and it's not the same thing, but it's the same idea. We have an annual consumer price index inflation rate. What happens every month is the previous year's month disappears and the new month's number appears. So if in say January, or let's say December of 2020, the unemployment or the CPI was hypothetically, I think it was about 0.2%. Okay, and annually it was 1.4, 1.5% annually. If that 0.2% from last December, this December we have an inflation rate of 0.6%. That's an increase of 0.4%, and that's why it goes up on an annual basis, because you lose the low number and you increase the high number. That's what's happening with this. As they do it month to month, they drop off a low number during the Trump years, and they add a high number in the Biden years. And that is how so over the course of the next 6 months, we're going to see a dramatic increase in the number of people who die on an annual basis, because the low numbers from a year ago are going to be gone and be replaced by higher numbers of deaths.
Rick,
and
Diana,
we have to stop it now. We have to stop this epidemic now.
Diana Mann asks, how do we tell them to shut down the border? And I like what you said earlier. They can do it through these spending bills, the continuing resolution.
Diana, let's say hypothetically that your congressman is Ken Calvert, just hypothetically. And, from California, he represents the Riverside area in California. It's where I grew up. That's why I picked him. If he represents your district, or any member of Congress, whoever's your congressional representative, contact them, call their office, and say, I expect you to stop the flood of immigration and to force Biden to close the border through the appropriations bill. That's all you need to say. Through the appropriations bill, shut down the border. They will know what that means. You can say as a proxy, build the wall. Force Biden to build the wall by putting it in the appropriations bill and not allow. And he's not going to shut down the border over the wall, or shut down the government over the wall. So the Republicans can do this. They can say, we will not vote for this unless you do something. And so it's up to your members of Congress. They have to get a backbone. They have to understand this is important, and they got to start fighting for America.
Rick, I can tell you, having worked in a congressional office, that those members of Congress, every day, my member that I worked for would ask us sort of, what are the emails that are coming in? What are the phone calls about? And he would sort of just want a rough tally or an estimate of what kind of communications people in his district were giving him. And he did that every single day on every issue. He wanted to know what the people in the district were talking about. That was so important to him. And I know it is to all of those members, because that's how they get reelected, is by listening to their constituents. So as constituents, I think when we send in emails or phone calls to our member of Congress, they do get recorded. I know sometimes we feel like we're being ignored or we're just one small fish, but I do know that those members of Congress, they listen. And when they get enough voices in their district, speaking out on an issue, that really gets their attention.
It does. And I would anticipate on Monday of next week, we'll do a take action that designed to hit on Tuesday before Thanksgiving, urging them to take action on the wall, urging them to take action on the border. because this is the shot. You get down to it, we will never get this unless it's on a must-pass piece of legislation. You might remember in 2018, I think it was, President Trump demanded that they fund the border wall. And after, quite honestly, the Republicans let him down in 2017. It might have been 2019. I can't remember which year it was. But they let him down for 2 years. He didn't get the wall funded. And he said, listen, we're shutting down the government unless we get the wall funded. And the government was shut down for a good 17 days, but the wall got funded. Okay. And because the president said, I'm not signing something unless the wall is funded. Well, in this case, what Congress has to do, the Republicans in the Senate and the Republicans on the House side need to lock arms and say, we're not voting to fund this government unless you protect the border, unless you protect the people who are dying from the opioid crisis, unless you protect our jobs, unless you protect our property from the theft that's going along the border. Unless you do these things and take your job seriously as President of the United States and stop just this open border policy, which is destroying our country, unless you do that, we will not fund the government. And let's have that fight. Let's force the Democrats to have that fight, because if the Democrats have that fight, it is a massive loser for them. And that, my friends, is how you win in politics, is you have to be willing to take risks and stick your neck out and fight and not look at everything as a deal to be cut for the next time, because sometimes there isn't a next time. And this is one of those instances. How many people are going to die of this opioid crisis because we will not shut down the border, and we will not shut down the fentanyl distributions coming into this country? It is inexcusable. It has to happen. Contact your congressman. We'll put something out there on Monday giving you some tools to do that. But in the meantime, call them up. In the House, it's 225-202-225-3121. That's 202-225-3121. Ask for your congressman's office. In the Senate, it's 202-224-3121. Ask for your senator's office for one of your two senators' offices. That's how you do it right now by phone. We'll get you an email tool on Monday.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Rick. We appreciate you watching. And please share this video, like, and subscribe to our channel. One moment.